Imagine you're 15 years old. The sky you grew up under fades behind you as strangers drag you from your village, your language, your prayers, your name left behind like ashes. You don't know where you're going, only that the boat smells of salt and fear, that the men don't look at you with kindness. They tell you you're lucky, that you're going to a palace, that your beauty is a gift. And then you arrive. The walls are made of marble. The ceilings drip gold. Silk robes are draped over your shaking shoulders. Your hair is brushed until it shines like polished obsidian. But something feels wrong. There are no windows. The doors only open from the outside. And the other girls, they don't smile. They study you the way predators study prey. You were brought here not to be loved, not to be celebrated, but to be broken, to be shaped into something pleasing, silent, obedient. You were brought here for a man you've never met and may never see, to decide whether you are worth a single glance. This place is called a harem. They will tell you it's paradise. They will tell you it's honor. But the truth is simpler and far more brutal. It is a prison built on stolen youth, a factory for sexual slavery, polished until it gleams. Behind every jeweled wall is a story buried in silence. Behind every silk curtain is a girl praying to disappear. This isn't history wrapped in romance. This is a machinery of exploitation, sharpened over 500 years of imperial design. And if you're ready, I'll take you inside. Not the version from fairy tales, but the truth, stripped of fantasy. Because behind the legend of the Ottoman harem is a horror the world has chosen to forget. Part 1. Selection. Beautiful or dead. They came at dawn, not with fire, not with blood, but with gold and promises. Men in robes, speaking languages the children didn't understand. They weren't raiders. They were merchants of flesh, and they didn't need to steal what they could persuade others to give. In Georgian villages, in Albanian hillsides, in the dark corners of Greece and Ukraine, families were told this was an opportunity, a chance for their daughters to live in palaces, to wear silk, to rise beyond poverty. Some cried as they let go. Some prayed. Some believed. But none of them understood what they were really doing. The girls were between 8 and 14, chosen like cattle at market, examined for posture, skin tone, teeth alignment, body shape. Beauty wasn't just a blessing. It was a death sentence in disguise. Those selected were placed on caravans or boats, shipped across miles of empire to a single destination, Istanbul, to the palace, to the cage. But arrival didn't mean acceptance. The real selection began behind the palace gates, a process so dehumanizing it made the journey feel merciful. Each girl was stripped, not just of her clothes, but of her identity. She was renamed in Turkish, often based on her hair color, eye shape, or the way she cried. Her original name, her faith, her family, gone. Then came the physical inspection, internal exams to ensure virginity, detailed measurements of every limb, curve, and blemish, breath checked, gait observed, posture scrutinized. But the worst was yet to come. They were deliberately infested with lice. Yes, lice. Ottoman physicians believed that lice would not survive on the bodies of girls infected with leprosy or plague. So they watched the bugs. If they died, the girl was unclean. If they lived, she passed. Weeks of silent itching, silent fear. They weren't even allowed to cry. And when the lice were done crawling, The eyes of the matrons began watching. At night, the girls were observed in their sleep. If a girl snored, she was unstable. If she talked in her dreams, she was mentally ill. If she sighed, she was too emotional. Every breath, every twitch, every whisper in the dark could condemn her. Out of hundreds brought in, many were quietly removed. Some were sold to other households. Some disappeared. The ones who remained, they had passed the first test. They were beautiful. They were healthy. And now they would be unmade. Part 2. Erasure, forgetting you ever existed. They called it education. But what it truly was annihilation. Once a girl passed the selection, her body was no longer hers. And now they came for her mind. The first thing to go was her name. No one in the palace spoke it again. It was erased from the air, scraped from her memory like chalk from a slate. She was given a new name in Turkish, a name that described her body, not her soul. Black eyes, golden skin, quiet one. Not names, labels. Then came religion. The girls were lined up and forced to recite the Islamic creed in a tongue they didn't know, worshiping a God they hadn't been raised with. There was no explanation, no invitation, only demand. Conversion wasn't about faith, it was about obedience, submission, erasure. They were told their families were dead, not missing, not left behind, dead. Letters, forbidden. Memories, poison. The message was clear. You belong to no one but the Sultan. You were never anyone before this. Language became a weapon. They were forbidden from speaking their mother tongues. Instead, they were taught Turkish, Arabic, and Persian, the imperial tongues of command and seduction. The quicker you learned, the more useful you were. The slower you were, the quicker you vanished. But they didn't just want silent obedience. They wanted entertainment. And so the training began. Dancing, music, poetry, but not for art. Every skill was another tool to please one man. They danced not for joy, but to be chosen. They played instruments not for beauty, but for attention. They recited poetry not to stir hearts, but to seduce the Sultan. And then came the erotic arts, taught by older women, survivors who had long since buried their own humanity. The new girls learned how to serve, not in kitchens, in beds. They were taught where to place their hands, how to walk, how to breathe. They were taught silence during pain, stillness during shame. This wasn't grooming, it was programming. This was a system built to turn children into concubines with surgical precision. Their bodies were also shaped, literally. Diet was controlled to maintain softness. Exercise was enforced to ensure flexibility. Skin was scrubbed, powdered, perfumed until they glowed like porcelain. They were bathed daily under watch, dried by others, dressed by others. They owned nothing, not even the right to touch themselves. But the cruelest lessons were not taught in words. They were taught in glances. They learned that compassion is weakness, that friendship is dangerous, that every girl beside them was a rival, a potential enemy, a threat to their survival. They were rewarded for silence, punished for questions, elevated for cruelty, forgotten for kindness. And perhaps worst of all, they were never told the truth. Most would never meet the Sultan, never dance for him, never be touched by him. They would spend their youth preparing for a man who would never see them. grow old in silk-lined cages, die as virgins in gilded beds. And that was the plan. Because once you forget who you are, you stop fighting to be anything else. Part 3. Competition, survival, by devouring each other. There were hundreds of them, sometimes 1,000. Girls in silk, young and perfect, walking the same corridors, learning the same dances, praying for the same impossible thing, to be seen, to be chosen, to matter. But there was only one man, only one sultan, and his gaze was rarer than sunlight in the dungeon they called paradise. So the girls turned on each other, not openly, never with fists or blades, no. This war was fought with silence and stares, whispers, and perfectly timed smiles. Kindness could cost you a meal. Friendship could cost you your future. A single misplaced word could destroy you or save the girl beside you. They competed in everything. Who could sing the sweetest? Who could walk with the softest steps? Who could lower her gaze just enough to seem humble, but not so much as to disappear? The hierarchy was invisible, but every girl could feel it pressing down on her chest. At the very bottom, the Odalak, the lowest rank. Servants in everything but name. They polished marble floors by day and their own skin by night, hoping, praying, aching to climb. Above them, the Guzdalar, the ones who caught the Sultan's eye, even for a second. To be a Guzde was to taste hope and risk everything for one more glance. Higher still, the Iqbals, the favorites, the ones who had touched him, spoken to him, breathed the same air as him in private. And at the top, the Haseki Sultan, the chosen one, the official consort, the woman who bore him a child, and with it, real power. But the truth, even she wasn't safe. Once a concubine gave the Sultan a son, her purpose changed. She would be sent away, exiled with the child to a distant province, out of sight, out of favor, out of the palace. Even victory felt like a kind of death. And so the girls fought on, not with violence, but with performance. Every smile was a weapon, every compliment a trap, every act of grace rehearsed. Some poisoned rivals, others lied, accused, betrayed. Whispers of witchcraft, broken perfume bottles laced with herbs that stopped hearts silently, a spilled cup of wine at just the right moment to suggest clumsiness or madness. And worst of all, no one could be trusted, because the prize wasn't gold, it was existence, and the punishment for failure was to become invisible. In this place, girls didn't grow up, they evolved into something sharper than steel, more patient than venom, because in the Sultan's harem, the rule was simple: be the most desirable, or be forgotten. Part 4. Punishment. A single glance could kill you. There were no trials in the harem, no appeals, no second chances, just rules written in silence and punishments carved in flesh. You could live there for years and never truly know what you did wrong, but you would know you had done something wrong when the guards came. Maybe you looked at a eunuch too long, 2 seconds of eye contact, just enough to be noticed, just enough to be suspected. Maybe you frowned at your food. Maybe someone heard you sigh and whispered your name into the wrong ear. It didn't matter. Intent was irrelevant. Perception was everything. And the punishment always came swift, quiet and cruel. 50 lashes, naked back against cold marble, leather biting into skin until it split, not just from pain, but from humiliation. Then came the dark room, a stone cell beneath the palace, colder than any winter wind, where no sound existed but your own breath turning into sobs. 3 days, no food, no water, no light, just silence, and your mind unraveling thread by thread. But that was mercy compared to what others faced. Girls who showed signs of sadness, of remembering who they once were isolated, not helped, not healed. They were buried alive inside the palace. No voices, no faces, no time, just stone and memory and the slow dissolution of self. The worst fate wasn't death, it was Exile, the old palace, a place where the forgotten were exiled to rot. You didn't leave Exile, no one did. It was where aging concubines were sent to wait for death, stripped of titles, stripped of jewels, stripped of hope. You entered a room and stayed there until the world forgot you had ever been beautiful. But the cruelty of the system didn't end with whips or cells. It was psychological, elegant in its brutality. The harem taught girls to punish each other. They watched each other like hawks, not for safety, but for leverage. A single tear at the wrong time could be reported as rebellion. A glance toward a window, proof of an escape attempt. Every girl became a spy. Every girl became a judge. Every girl became a threat. They learned to smile while dying inside, to offer gratitude for their suffering, to fight for the affection of the man who owned their body, and the approval of the guards who owned their soul. Because in the Ottoman harem, rebellion wasn't crushed. It was made unthinkable, not through force, but through fear, through hunger, through hope, through isolation so complete it could break the mind before it ever thought to resist. And perhaps that was the true genius of the system. It didn't just punish you when you disobeyed. It made you punish yourself for even thinking of disobedience. Part 5. Massacre. 280 women drowned in a single night. It began, as horror often does, with silence. No screams, no warnings, just an order. The Sultan, Ibrahim the Mad, was displeased. No one knew why. Perhaps the food, perhaps a dream, perhaps the way one girl looked at him that morning. But in the empire of absolute power, reason was never required. What followed was not rage, not a tantrum. It was policy. That night, 280 women, concubines, dancers, servants, dreamers, were taken from their chambers. They were not told where they were going. Some thought it was a festival. Some thought perhaps they had finally been chosen. But instead of music, there were sacks. Instead of incense, there was rope. And instead of destiny, there was the sea. Each girl was sewn into a silk bag. A stone was tied to her feet. And without a word, without even a final scream, they were dropped into the Bosphorus, one by one. 280, a single night, a single breath from a sultan no longer entertained by his own collection of souls. They didn't die instantly. No, that would have been too merciful. The silk bags were made thick enough to keep them from tearing through. The stones were heavy, but not fast. They had minutes, long, drowning minutes, to feel the weight of their fate, to understand, in those final heartbeats, that every smile, every bow, every act of perfect obedience had meant nothing. Divers later reported what they called underwater forests, dozens of sacks swaying beneath the surface like grotesque lanterns hanging in the currents. The bodies inside still moving with the tide, still dancing, but now for no one. The city tried to forget, but it couldn't. Mothers whispered warnings to their daughters. Servants refused to look at the water. Even the palace grew quieter. But inside the harem, something deeper changed. The girls who remained, the survivors, didn't cry. They didn't scream. They smiled wider. They bowed lower. They laughed when commanded, because now they knew there were no rules. There was no safety. There was only his mood. And if that mood turned, you could vanish from history in a night. This massacre was not an accident. It was a lesson, a message carved into the sea. Your beauty will not save you. Your loyalty will not save you. Your silence is not enough. Only fear would keep the system running. Only terror would ensure the next 280 girls smiled through their own doom. And so they did, until history looked away and the sea forgot their names. Part 6, the eunuchs, men without manhood, masters of every body. They were the gatekeepers, the watchers, the ones who stood between the girls and death, but also between the girls and any scrap of freedom. They were called eunuchs, boys taken in childhood, castrated before their voices broke, before their desires awoke, before they even understood what was being stolen. Some bled to death, others lived, and those who survived were made into tools. Not men, not quite, not servants, but not rulers. They existed in a space of paradox, powerless in body, yet powerful beyond measure. In the Ottoman harem, eunuchs ruled everything. They controlled food, bathing water, letters, whispers, access to the Sultan, access to hope. If a girl needed anything, she had to go through them, and most learned very quickly. Needs were punishments waiting to happen. They could deny soap in summer. They could withhold blankets in winter. They could force girls to kneel for water, to beg for fresh clothes, to wait for hours in silence just to relieve themselves. They didn't need to beat them. Their power lay in humiliation. But some enjoyed going further. They conducted inspections, allegedly for contraband or illness. But the girls knew better. These were rituals of domination. Hands cold, gaze indifferent, nothing left untouched. They knew the girls could not resist, could not scream, could not complain. And sometimes, most cruelly, the eunuchs offered hope. They would promise advancement, a higher bed, a better robe, a chance to be seen by the Sultan. But the price? Loyalty, obedience, favors, sometimes sexual, though they themselves could not act. Sometimes psychological, humiliations disguised as games. The worst ones turned cruelty into theater. They would make the girls dance privately for their amusement, judge them as if they were the Sultan himself, praise one girl, then starve her the next day, give gifts only to take them back an hour later. These men, mutilated in flesh, became masters of mind games because pain had taught them one thing. If you cannot control your own body, then control someone else's. Still, they too were prisoners. They too had been broken. But instead of weeping, they became the architects of other people's suffering. And when the Sultan chose a girl, it was the eunuchs who prepared her. They bathed her, perfumed her, painted her lips, arranged her limbs like a living doll. They led her to the bedchamber, closed the doors, and stood guard outside. They would never touch her the way the Sultan would, but in a way, they touched her more deeply by shaping every step that brought her there. They were both victims and executioners, tools of the empire, and sometimes monsters of their own making. Because in the Ottoman harem, power didn't require desire, only control, only silence, only the right to say yes or no when no one else could say anything at all. Part 7. The War Without Blades, Poison, Pregnancy, and Betrayal. By now, they no longer wept. They no longer remembered how. Tears were for girls, and the women of the harem had evolved into something else entirely. Survivors with sharpened smiles and arsenic in their hearts. Because within these walls, the most dangerous thing a woman could become was pregnant. Pregnancy meant power. Pregnancy meant proximity to the throne. Pregnancy, with the Sultan's child, could elevate a girl to Haseki Sultan, official consort, mother of a potential future ruler. But pregnancy also meant target. A womb full of royalty was more dangerous than any sword. So the moment a girl began to swell, the whispers began too. And then the accidents, a broken step, a spoiled meal, a tea laced with crushed herbs, subtle, silent, deadly. Miscarriages were common, too common, but never investigated. Because in the harem, jealousy was not a flaw. It was a survival tactic. The women didn't fight each other with fists. They fought with cosmetics mixed with toxins, with compliments that carried veiled threats, with favors given today and used as blackmail tomorrow. One smile could mean friendship or death. They mastered manipulation the way others mastered prayer. And often, it was the kindest-looking ones who killed the most. Even those who succeeded, who carried their pregnancies to term, were not safe, because now they were mothers, and in the Ottoman system, mothers of princes were generals in invisible wars. A son was a claim to power, but he was also a threat to every other prince, and therefore to every other mother. So they built alliances, gathered informants, watched who spoke to whom, who lingered at which doorway, who smiled at which child. Some mothers poisoned toys, others arranged accidents in palace gardens. A slip into the pond, a fall from the stairs, a servant dismissed just before something went terribly wrong. The harem became a battlefield, not of armies, but of intentions, not of swords, but of lullabies sung too sweetly. Even love became a weapon. A mother could not simply love her son. She had to protect him like a state secret, because to lose him wasn't just to grieve. It was to disappear from the palace hierarchy entirely. Once a son died, so did his mother's status. She returned to the shadows, forgotten, irrelevant, replaceable. So they fought and killed and smiled through the blood. And history never recorded their names, only the names of the sons who survived their wars, and the thrones they eventually claimed, thrones built on cradles filled with whispers and graves. Part 8. Decay. When beauty expires, so does your worth. In the beginning, beauty was everything, It opened doors, it earned glances, it gave you purpose. But beauty fades, and in the harem, when it did, you weren't mourned, you were moved, not with violence, not with cruelty, but with quiet paperwork, a silent procession, a final night in silk. Then the gates of Eski Sarai, the old palace, closed behind you. No music played there, no whispers of hope, just stone walls, cold floors, and the echo of lives already forgotten. This was not retirement. This was exile. This was death that stretched across decades. Here, the women aged slowly, alone, useless, invisible. Their names were no longer spoken. Their eyes, once outlined in coal, dulled into gray. Their skin, once perfumed and kissed by candlelight, cracked in the dry silence of memory. No one visited, no letters arrived. No one cared if they lived another year or didn't. Some of them held on, clung to the walls, to the old routines, brushing their thinning hair as if someone might still care. Others stopped speaking, stopped eating. Some forgot their own names. And then there were those who remembered too much. They sat in corners and whispered to ghosts. Named the girls who had died in the water. Named the eunuchs. Named the nights when they almost mattered. The younger women feared becoming them, but they all knew if they lived long enough, they would. Because in the end, the harem had no graves, only forgotten rooms, only wasted beauty. And the cruelest truth, the system didn't need to kill you. It just had to wait until your youth faded, until your skin sagged, until your eyes lost that light the Sultan might have once noticed. Then you were done. Not punished, not condemned, just erased, like a song no longer played, like a scent that vanished from the pillow. You began as treasure, you ended as dust, and the world, the empire, the court, the Sultan himself never looked back. Epilogue. The smoke behind the silk. We remember the palaces, the domes, the glittering gold, the poetry carved into marble, but we forget the girls. Their names were erased, their stories silenced, their pain hidden beneath layers of silk and myth. The harem wasn't a love story. It wasn't a paradise. It was an empire within an empire, built on stolen girlhood, perfected over centuries, and buried beneath the weight of its own luxury. What history calls tradition, these women lived as torment. What tourists see as beauty, they died calling a cage. Behind every curtain was a life unmade. Behind every perfume bottle, a prayer never answered. And behind every recorded heir to the throne, 1,000 forgotten mothers who never got to speak. So, if you remember the Sultan, remember them too. Not as queens or temptresses or ornaments, but as girls who once had names and dreams and voices, until an empire taught them silence.